and we will go ahead and get started. Today, as has been mentioned, I am going to present on what we call Your Second Home in America, finding the best U.S. university for you. So over the next hour or so here, I'm going to be giving you some tips, some thoughts, some things to think about as you make that decision about coming to the U.S. and studying here and decide ultimately where it is you want to go. Just to kind of give you a background in terms of where I'm coming from. So that's me. I am Andrew Conlog. I am our international student recruiter here. As has been mentioned, I'm here at Northern Arizona University. So I guess really you're in the process of making three decisions here. So first, you've decided to study abroad, which is excellent. Really, really encourage you to do that. Now, you've decided to study abroad, or at least considering it as of now, in the United States. Another very good decision. I highly encourage you to do that as well. And also, you've done a really good job already in coming to the right place. Those are a couple of big decisions that you've made already. And now you have to make another decision in terms of exactly where in the United States you want to study. Now, that's a very big decision. And that's a decision that can have a lot of endpoints. There are a lot of different places to study in the United States. When you find the right place, when you find the right fit, that's really what it is. It is your second home. But these are the kind of questions that you want to be asking as you're making that decision here. So I'm going to go over all of these in more detail as we go forward here. So start with location. So the United States is a big country, and there are a lot of different options in terms of studying here. Really, any state, any large city, many small towns have a place to study, have a college, have a university that could potentially be a destination for you. So you have a lot of things to think about when it comes to location, especially since you're going to be there for a number of years, is really something important that you want to think about. Next, of course, is your major. Now, I'm sure most of you have put some thought into exactly what major you want to eventually study when you study abroad here. Finding the place that fits that major and finding a good profile for that major at the university or college that you're looking at, and the learning environment more broadly. Of course, it's good and it's something that you want to think about in terms of the major, but we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. But the learning environment as well is something that you want to think about as well. What is the campus like? And what is the housing like on campus, off campus? Those are definitely things that you want to be thinking about here. Of course, education is very important, and that's the big component of studying abroad, but it's not all of it. You also want to be thinking about some of these, what we call extracurricular activities, sports, activities, student life, what's available, what are the kinds of things that you'll be able to take advantage of. And then, of course, it comes down to some other questions like the tuition that you'll have to be looking at here, some of the fees associated with it. Another really important question is about scholarships. You've taken a look at this university, you're thinking about it, what potential financial aid might they offer? That's definitely something to think about too. And then, of course, the application process itself. So that's kind of a long introduction here, but these are all things that you're gonna be wanting to think about as you make that decision for where you ultimately think that you want to go and where you want to apply for. But I'd like to go over each of these things in a little bit more detail. So location, this is the place where we want to start, and especially when it comes to studying in the United States. The United States is a big country, and if you're in one state, it can be a lot different of an experience than when you're in another state. So what I mean by that is when you're looking at, again, the US specifically here, what geographic region are you in? Sometimes it's kind of hard to know just from a name, especially if you're not as familiar with the geography of the United States. It can be in the New York area or California, and that's many, many thousands of miles away from each other. And with that comes some questions about what the living experience is like. The living experience, especially in the US, can be very different when we go for urban versus rural. So some of the big cities in California, Los Angeles, San Francisco, those are the urban environments that we have in the US. That is very different than a rural environment in the US, where it's more of these wide open spaces, and the towns that you may be in might have a smaller population. You'll find colleges and you'll find universities in both of these environments. So that's a very personal decision, and it's very personal to each individual person, and it's something that you're going to be wanting to think about. Would you like to live in a big city? Would you like to live in an environment where things are happening all the time, and that kind of environment where there are a lot of people? Some people really do. Would you like to live in an environment that's a little smaller, where there's a little bit more nature, where things are maybe a little bit quieter in terms of the everyday life? Some people really do as well. That's definitely something that you're going to be wanting to take a look at there. In addition, and each of these things kind of goes with it together, our cost of living as well. As a function of being a very large country, the cost of living can vary quite a bit across the US. Some of these really big cities that I mentioned are a little pricey in terms of what you'd be looking at. But there's a lot of variation also in the US. Some big cities have a lower cost of living. Some rural areas have a higher cost of living. This is really a good thing to research, and we'll look at that a little bit later, but especially in terms of housing too. Activities to match your interests too. Do you really like the big city? Do you really like the kind of, they call New York City the city that never sleeps? Do you like that environment where you can kind of be up and around anytime? Do you like nature? Are you into the environment and into seeing some of these, like hiking or out and about and things like that? And then of course, it's always really good to look at safety as well. Those are things you can look at for where exactly you're looking to study, and there will be statistics and there will be information available. That's also definitely something that you would really want to be aware of as well. So the other nice thing about the US being so big is that I feel like really no matter what it is you're looking for, you can find it in the US, and you'll find a place that will be that second home, but it might require looking around a little bit. But now let's think a little bit more about the university. So now we've talked about where you want in a living environment. What do you want in a college? So I'm going to talk about these in a little bit more detail here, but here's some things to think about what you want in your college here. What kind of facilities do they have in terms of your major especially? Do you know anything about the faculty? What kind of faculty do they have there, especially in your programs? And you want to look at some information about the programs themselves. Where do the programs show up in rankings and ratings? And what kind of accreditations do these universities have here? So this is a good way to kind of get started in thinking a little bit about what exactly the college would look like here. So then another thing that I want to mention a little bit in terms of terms, but then also to kind of get you started on what you're thinking about here. When it comes to the US higher education system, there's a lot of different kind of terms, and sometimes words get used the same here. College can just mean a school like a university, but I also am going to refer to colleges within a university. So this is just something to keep in mind here. Many universities where the way they're structured is each group of majors is within a college. So it'll be called, for example, the College of Business or the College of Engineering. And that's how it's all kind of divided up here. So when you're looking at a university here, you're also going to want to look at the colleges within the university as you're making that decision about your major especially, because each of the colleges within the university can have some differences in terms of course they have differences because they each focus on different majors, but they also can have differences in terms of the culture or in terms of particular rankings within majors or things along those lines. So as you study what university you're interested in, you definitely want to take a look at some of these colleges as well, and make sure that you take a look at what major you're interested in. So we've thought about our location. We've thought about some of our majors and what we'd be interested in here. Now, the next really big thing to think about here is what the campus is like, and then what the housing on the campus is like as well. So Couple of things to think about just in general. Housing in the US, in US higher ed institutions, there's on-campus housing and then there's off-campus housing. So on-campus housing is housing that's associated with the campus directly. So that means that you'll be living on campus. And then off-campus housing, as its name suggests, is housing that is not on campus. Sometimes it's very close to campus. Just again, to use NAU as an example, we have quite a few off-campus housing options that are located basically right next to campus, but they're not directly affiliated with the university. They're not run by the university. So they're considered off-campus housing. Now, one thing to check with the university is that some universities, especially for undergraduates, they may actually require you to live on campus, at least for your first year. So that's something that you want to think about. Some do, some don't. So when you're looking at a university and you're thinking about that housing stage here, that's a good question or thing to keep in mind right off the bat. So again, just to use NAU as an example, we do have a variety of on-campus housing options. We have different learning communities. We do have a dorm that's specifically for international students and American students that select that they want to live there. You may find something like that at your university as well, where you have on-campus housing options. You can have dorms that are just more general, but you can also have specific living communities, like that community that I mentioned that's specific to international students and American citizens. But also you can have learning communities where it's based around your major and you have a housing situation with just people in your major, things along those lines. And those are really good questions to ask. You know, what kind of on-campus housing options do I have? And what kind of communities do I have at this university here? Also, if you're thinking about off-campus housing, that's definitely something that I would look into. I mean, I would say the earlier the better, because it's really good to know what kind of options you'll have, how close will the housing be to campus. And I mean, of course, there are going to be several different options, but maybe in some places that you're at, there's lots of options, you don't have to worry about it. Maybe not so many, and you might have to be thinking about options that are a little bit further from campus. And then it's also a good time to start asking the question about roommates too. So especially for undergraduates, most on-campus housing situations will have at least one roommate. If that's something you're interested in and excited about, that's good to know. If that's something maybe not so much, off-campus housing would probably be your best option. But again, these are questions that you want to be asking each university that you're thinking about. Will I have a roommate? Do I have to have a roommate? Are there any scenarios where I cannot have a roommate? Or if I want to live alone, do I have to go off campus? Like those kind of questions are really, really good to ask as well. And then another thing that I think is really, really important to think about when you're thinking about studying in the US, people that do not live in the US don't necessarily think about in as much detail as transportation. There will be places in the US where you have a lot of options in terms of public transportation. And there will be places where you won't. There are some places in the US where you really are probably going to have a car to get around if you live any distance from campus or if you plan on going anywhere else other than campus. But that's a really, really important question that you're going to want to ask. What is the transportation like? And especially depending on where I am living or where I'm thinking about living, what are my transportation options for getting to school? And then dining is a really good thing to think about as well. Almost all, I would say, universities have a union, which is where you can get food on campus or options on campus. You want to take a look at that in advance, especially if diet and if things related to eating are something that's really important to you for whatever reason. You would definitely want to make sure that you did some research and found out what kind of dining options they had on campus. What kind of dining options do they have near campus? What kind of food does the city that you live in have in general? Now, something that I think is really, really important to be thinking about, and again, you're more or less thinking about all of these at the same time as you're making that application decision, is what is student life going to look like? you're going to want to think about the options that you have in terms of the time that you're not spending studying. What options do you have here? What kind of amenities does your potential university have in terms of recreation centers to work out or to play sports? In terms of the sports that they have to watch. That's a really big part of college life in the US. Clubs, what kind of organizations can you join? There's a lot of different organizations that you could potentially join. Arts, athletics. What kind of academic support does your potential university have in terms of career services, in terms of tutoring, in terms of some other options as well? How safe is the campus? What safety measures does your college present? All this information you're able to find, and you should be able to find if you're looking, and your university rep, somebody like myself, like a recruiter or somebody else within the organization, could give you all this information, but these are definitely things you want to ask. These kinds of fees are basically, in terms of type, what you're going to be looking at no matter where you're studying here. And this is just an example of what it could look like potentially. So again, this is going to be a big thing that you're going to be wanting to think about and make sure that you understand as you're taking a look at what university you ultimately want to go to here. Most universities are going to have a breakdown like this, and they're going to have a breakdown specifically for international students as well. So somewhere on the website or a person like myself, like a recruiter, should be able to provide it for you too. So of course we have tuition, just the direct cost of tuition there. Most universities will have some kind of mandatory fees associated with it here. Here we have also some costs, some estimated costs in terms of housing, in terms of meals, in terms of books and supplies. And then finally, another thing that I always just mention to international students, because it's a little different here in the United States, is health insurance. Just suffice it to say that likely there will be a mandatory health insurance plan that you're going to have to join as a student. And those things all together are going to add up to your ultimate cost. Again, NAU just as an example here, but typically these are the kinds of cost breakdowns that you'd be looking at no matter where you're going to be going. Again, just to use that as an example here, this is definitely a very important question to ask. Now, again, using NAU as an example, but I'm going to talk more in general too about a really important thing, scholarships. So this is another really big question that you're going to want to ask. And sometimes it will be a question that you'll have to ask to get a little bit more information on. And you may have to search around a little bit and ask some questions to find your best option. But I really would encourage you to do so, because financial aid and scholarships are going to be a really important. And sometimes as an international student, it is a little bit more difficult to find those opportunities, but you really should take advantage of them when you're able to do so. We do have a scholarship specifically for international students. It's called our International Excellence Award. We award that to students that are high achievers in their previous degree program. And it's a $10,000 per year scholarship that's renewable. So the reason that I made all those different points is because I think all the things that I just described about the scholarship are questions that you should ask about whatever scholarship or financial aid opportunity that you could potentially be presented with. So how do I apply for it? How exactly is it awarded? Who is it awarded to, and under what circumstances? So in our case, international students who are high achieving in their previous school, but that's the question that you want to ask. And then also, how much is it for? Make sure that you get more information exactly on that. Also, another good question to ask, again, I use ours as an example. Ours is called a partial tuition waiver. And what that means is it just comes right out of your tuition. When your tuition is charged, it is just by that much less, basically. So you're also going to want to ask, how is it awarded? Is it a tuition waiver? Does it come out of other things? More than most likely, it'll be a way to reduce tuition, but it's good to ask in case it's something like they take fees off or something along those lines. And then a really good question to ask too is it renewable? We renew it as long as you maintain a 3.0 GPA per year. You can continue to get the scholarship the entire time you're here. That's also a good question. Is it renewable, and under what circumstances? Is there something that I have to do to make sure that it's renewable? So definitely find those opportunities and ask those questions.